all hell is going to break loose tomorrow. Just understand this. All hell is going to break loose tomorrow.
Former Trump advisor Steve Bannon on January 5th, the day before the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. Bannon has a first court appearance tomorrow on contempt of Congress charges for refusing to provide information to the House committee investigating the riot. And it's time now for our Sunday group. Former RNC Communications Director Doug Heye, Julie Pace, Executive Editor for the Associated Press, and Mo Alathi of Georgetown University's Institute of Politics and Public Service. Julie, it is rare for the Justice Department to prosecute criminal contempt of Congress charges. But what does this case say about the ability down the line for the House committee investigating the January 6th riot to actually be able to hear from former Trump advisors, despite the former president's claim of executive privilege?
I think that this is potentially a boost for this committee, which has been struggling to get some key people to actually show up, to talk with them, to turn over documents. And this is a warning shot from the Justice Department that if individuals who were close to President Trump are refusing to participate in this process, they could face criminal prosecution. I do think Bannon's case is a bit unique because he was trying to fall within the executive privilege umbrella, even though he had left the White House in 2017. I think there are big questions that we'll be looking to get answers from the Justice Department on in terms of Mark Meadows, who was chief of staff, who was in the White House. Does executive privilege extend to him? But certainly for this committee, which wants to move rapidly, wants to get answers from key people around President Trump, I think this is a real potential boost for them.
Yeah, Doug, I want to pick up on a couple of the points that Julie made, because the Bannon case is different. First of all, President Trump is no longer the president. He's the former president. As she points out, Steve Bannon was not a current White House official at this time. He had been out of the White House since 2017. And also, we're not talking about the official business of the president. What we're talking about is investigating a crime, which was the insurrection at the Capitol. So what does all that say about the strength of Bannon's case, and is there a big difference between Bannon's case and that, let's say, of former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows?
Sure, there's an enormous difference. Obviously, the former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, is going to go through the process of seeing what is allowed in executive privilege and what isn't. And we don't know those answers yet. That's part of what we'll find out. Bannon just does not have those protections. And I can tell you, Chris, when I worked in the House of Representatives for then Majority Leader Eric Cantor, Congress held Eric Holder, the then Attorney General, in contempt for not appearing before Congress. Congress takes these things very seriously. And whether you're talking about a Republican House or a Democratic House, the primacy of Congress and its oversight is paramount, and Republicans and Democrats should be able to unify on this. They obviously won't, but if we have a Republican House in the future, they will have no hesitation in holding Democrats to contempt, just as we're seeing right now. It may be why the best option should have been having an independent committee all along.
Of course, that was blocked by the Senate Republicans. Congressman Jamie Raskin, who's a member of the January 6th House Committee, had a very strong reaction this week to the Bannon indictment. Take a look.
It was a criminal offense. He violated the law when he stood us up, when he blew off the subpoena, and he violated the law when he refused to produce the documents and the papers we were looking for.
Mo, the problem for the committee is that undoubtedly Steve Bannon and his lawyers are going to try to delay this case as long as possible, do everything they can procedurally to play it out. And there's a good chance, I think probably better than 50-50, we'd say now, that a year from now in the midterms, that Republicans may take control of the House, in which case, no matter what happens in this case, they would probably kill the committee, and there'd be no place for Bannon to testify, even if he's ordered to.
Yeah, and look, I agree with what Doug just said. I think there are a couple of long-term implications here. One is getting to the truth, right, of what happened on January 6th, and that is first and foremost what this is all about. But number two, it is about establishing and defending the role of Congress in oversight, and that cannot be a partisan thing. Republicans have held people in contempt. Democrats have held people in contempt. If you believe in the rule of law, law, if you believe in the Constitution, if you believe in the role that Congress plays, then you've got to support this. And I do think if Republicans take over a year from now and kill this whole endeavor, they are completely undermining their ability to hold oversight in the future. So there's a lot of different balls at play here.
Yeah, but Mo,
this will make the lame duck Congress in next December one of the wildest that we will ever have seen in Washington.
Yes, yes.
But Mo, let me just pick up on this idea that this should be above partisanship, this should be about the law. The House held Eric Holder, then the Attorney General for Barack Obama, in contempt, and the Obama administration and Obama Justice Department refused to prosecute that case. I mean, there's politics all over these kinds of cases.
Sure, but look, I do think, and you've already alluded to this in the earlier conversation, what happens with Bannon may be different than what happens with others. Bannon was not there. He was not in the White House. He talked about this on air the day before. There's no way to make the executive privilege claim. Whether or not others are successful in that will play out. That is, whether or not you're in government, that will play out. But this, I think, sends a very strong message that they're not playing around and that they want to get to the truth. This is unprecedented. And it's going to be treated as such.
Julie, we're talking about all the reasons that the Bannon case is different, but there is talk here in Washington, concern that it could open up a dangerous precedent. And seeing the willingness of the Biden administration to go after Steve Bannon and potentially to go after people with maybe a stronger case, like the White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, that this opens the door for one administration to go after officials in the previous administration.
And that's why I think the decisions that are still to come for the Justice Department are potentially even more significant. Because again, I think Bannon is a bit of a unique situation, having left the White House in 2017 and still trying to claim executive privilege, because there is a precedent that will be set by the decisions that come forward. If a sitting chief of staff is going to be prosecuted for failing to appear before Congress and talk about his direct conversations with the sitting president of the United States, I do think that is something that both parties would have some measure of concern about. But I think that the Justice Department here is also weighing, as you mentioned earlier, the incident that is at the center of this discussion. This is it was an attack on American democracy. It was an insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, and I do think that raises the significance of these decisions that they're making right now.
Finally, Doug, you wrote an interesting article this week talking about the continued drag that you feel that Donald Trump and especially his claims of a stolen election have on the Republican Party going forward into the 2022 midterms. Explain.
Well, it's not just 2022, it's 2024 as well. And my big concern is if Donald Trump doesn't run again, and obviously nobody knows what he's going to do, perhaps except for Trump himself, is that we could have a scenario where we have 17 Republicans running for president, like we did in 2016, and that there is no incentive for any Republican to accept the results of the Iowa caucus or the New Hampshire primary. In fact, they'd be incentivized if they come in second or even third to say that it's a fraud, to say that it was fixed, which could cause an entire presidential primary system to be in chaos in a state-by-state, almost rolling tour. And that's something that I don't think the Republican Party is prepared for, or really the country.
And what that means is that you have to make a break with the idea, if you're going to establish this principle, we're going to abide by the results, you have to make a break with President Trump, and that's a dangerous position for a Republican.
It's a dangerous position for any Republican. It's also a challenge for the party and for state parties as to will they accept their own results or not in deference to Trump or in deference to any of those candidates who might call into question, again, say the Iowa caucuses, which Donald Trump said was fixed when he lost it in 2016 to Ted Cruz.
Panel, we have to take a break here, but when we return...
People are feeling it. They're feeling it. Do you ever think you'd be paying this much for a gallon of gas? In some parts of California, they're paying $4.50 a gallon.
President Biden reacting to the latest inflation numbers. The consumer prices rose 6.2% from a year ago. And we're back now with the panel. Well, I think it's fair to say this is the week that inflation really hit home and became a top political issue. Beyond that overall 6.2%, increase, that figure. I want you to look at some of the spikes in specific items. Gas prices up 50%, beef prices up 20%, used car prices up 26%. Doug, how big a problem for President Biden and Democrats just a little bit less than a year out from the midterms?
This is a big problem that's going to get worse for Biden and the Democrats. And I think of Game of Thrones, Chris. Winter is coming. And what does that mean? Home heating oil prices. And if you're a Democrat in the Northeast, where those prices are going to be felt the most, you now have a new issue where you need to separate yourself with a president whose popularity continues to fall in every poll that we see.
Mo, I think what makes it even worse for this White House is that for months they've been talking down the threat of inflation. Listen to them and also to former Clinton and Obama top economic advisor Larry Summers, who's been sounding the alarm for a long time. Take a look.
Economists call all these things transitory effects.
There is a transitory nature to the inflation problem.
I think that the policymakers in Washington, unfortunately, have almost every month been behind the curve. They said it was transitory. It doesn't look so transitory.
Mo, when Larry Summers says he told them so, he did tell them so. He was right all along, and they were wrong.
Rule number one of political communications is don't tell people what they're feeling isn't real. You can tell them that the situation is temporary, that we're going to turn the corner, but acknowledging the pain and the concern people are feeling right out of the box is critical. The president's popularity was sky high for a while because they were pointing to results. They were able to go out there and say, we put money in your wallets, we put shots in your arms. Then they got into this big fight. They were getting ready to say, we put jobs in your communities with infrastructure. That got overcome by a big internal party fight over a big pile of money, over a number that didn't really have anything to it that people could wrap their heads around. Inflation layered on top of that, it's a big mess. They've got to get back out there and say, we get it, as they started to this week. We get it. Here's how we're going to turn the corner, and here's what the next wave of results are going to look like and how soon you might start to feel them. They can still turn the corner on this, but they squandered a couple of months. They, being the broader Democratic family, squandered a couple of months. They got to get back to pointing to those results and helping people understand that they get the problem.
But Julie, President Biden's answer to how he's going to get a handle on inflation is he says, let's pass this $1.7 trillion big social spending plan, which he says is going to lower inflation because it'll increase worker productivity through a lot of programs. But almost anybody who analyzes that bill, if it gets passed, says that in the short term it's going to boost inflation before in the long term perhaps it damps it down a bit.
And this is the problem that I think the Biden administration is going to face here. If they can get this bill passed, and we'll see how the next couple of days go here, but if they can get it passed, they are going to have to go out and argue that it was worth all of the time and energy and all of the procedural debate that consumed Washington for the last couple of months. And the reality is that the actual implementation of those policies will take time. And so if you're an American who is not following the ins and outs of the debates in Washington every day, as we are, and thank goodness for most of you that you're not doing that, you're looking at practical measures. You're looking at how much everyday items cost. You're looking at your grocery bill. And you're going to be looking next year at those prices and seeing if there's a change. And Democrats will argue that long term, that the provisions in this bill are good for the country. But I think the short term impact is what most people are going to be looking for, particularly heading into those midterms.
Doug, and then you've got some other really striking numbers that just came out this week. It turns out in September, 4.4 million Americans, 3% of the total national workforce, quit their jobs. Yeah. What does that say about the state of the economy and the impact for Democrats going forward?
Yeah, it says that voters are nervous about what their future might hold, that their jobs aren't paying as much as they need to keep their family going. And ultimately, the word transitory is a word that's used in Washington, D.C. It's not used at kitchen tables throughout this country. Those conversations are about their rising gas prices and how much more it costs to put beef on the table. That's a problem that Democrats need to address and need to understand. And right now, they're not showing that they really understand it at all.
Mo, there was an interesting debate debate in Washington this week. I think a lot of it sparked by, I thought, quite an interesting article by two Democrats, although they strayed in the Republican side at various points, Mark Penn and Andrew Stein, who argued very strongly that this president needs to make a sharp turn back to the center the way Bill Clinton did in 1994 after that midterm debacle. First of all, do you think this president is going to take that advice?
I think we obsess over left versus right versus center in this town in a way that nobody else does. I think we keep it not left versus right or center, but it's front versus back, right? People feel like they are stuck at the back of the line and they can't get ahead. So just talking about people is the way to go. You're starting to see the White House do that this week a little bit. You're starting to see them talk about the immediacy and the urgency for their agenda getting passed. That if it passes, that in 2022 you'll see child care costs come down by X amount. You'll see prescription drug prices come down for seniors by X amount. At least that starts to bring the conversation to the kitchen table that Doug was just talking about. That's what this president does very well, and he needs to get back to doing after a couple of months where Washington was just talking about a big pile of money.
I'm not sure, Julie, that I agree with Mo there, because it seems to me that whether it's spending this huge amount of money or immigration or crime or what goes on in schools, that there is an increasing perception out there. We certainly saw it played out in Virginia and New Jersey that Democrats and President Biden have moved to the left. First of all, do you think that's legitimate that they feel that? And secondly, do you feel that he's going to take this advice and tack back to the center? Or is that just not who he is?
I think there's just a huge blank space ahead of Joe Biden as he looks into next year and questions about how he is going to try to fill it. You know, what is he going to try to make a run at police reform legislation, at voting rights, two big Democratic priorities, particularly on the left, that have been really stalled out in Congress. Does he see that as a way to energize the base heading into the midterms? Does he spend the year campaigning on what he hopes will be a successful passage of the Build Back Better plan? I think that's the big decision for him. You know, what does next year look like? How does he position himself? Because again, they have spent so much time on these two big pieces of legislation, and there are a lot of promises that were made to a lot of Americans who voted for him that have gone unfulfilled.
But I got 20 seconds. Do you think Joe Biden has it in him to triangulate, to move sharply back to the center the way Bill Clinton did in the 90s?
I think it's certainly where he's comfortable, and if he feels like that's where he needs to go for the party to succeed, I think that might be where he would want to be.
Thank you, panel. See you next Sunday.